If you're a parent that is struggling to get your kid off the iPad when you're at a restaurant, then Dr. Madhumita Yeral comes to the rescue. She helps parents basically digitally detox their kids, stay in the present, and also helps parents learn tips and strategies to raise your children as tech free as possible. She's a parent coach and a consultant and a mother to a screen free child herself. And today we're going to pick her brains on all things related to screens, technology, but also raising resilient and kind children for an era which is going to be dominated by social media influence as well as technology. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Madhumita. It's really lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Deepa. I really appreciate being here.
So let's start off with your handle. Your handle on social media is called the Screen Free Parent. Tell us a bit more about what you do, your background, and why this interest in going screen free and raising children screen free.
So this was a very happy accident. The way this profile came about was a happy accident. I have a PhD in marketing and strategy from IIM Rohtak, and I have an entire 300-page thesis on getting people to scroll online for as long as possible. So the entire focus of my thesis was to get people shopping online for as long as possible and to keep them coming back. And it's really hyper specific. Okay, like what do you say to people when a product is out of stock? Depends on the nature of the product and there's a lot involved, but what is it that you do when a product is out of stock so the person doesn't get frustrated and click off the site and they keep coming back for more? So the crux of it all was to keep people online for as long as possible and to keep them shopping and to get all of the time, energy, attention, all of the resources on that website for as long as possible. And this is fine when you do it for people who are over the age of 21, right? 18, 21, because their prefrontal cortex is developed. They have, good impulse control. But then it's inherently unethical if you start doing it for very young kids. Kids who are like 2, 3, and you are engineering an online space in such a way that the child is just not able to look away for even a second, and then it starts to become a problem. And I did assume that that was not the case, because when we do our research, we get consent forms filled by people saying, I'm over the age of 21 and I consent to being a part of this experiment. And so the way I got into this was, I said, okay, this is something that you do for people who are adults, and you don't do this for children. And then there was this New York Times piece about how Cocomelon gets kids hooked on to its show. So they've got views in the billions, right? There's not one toddler parent who does not know what Cocomelon is. The way they do it is they've got two screens in front of the child, and one screen plays Cocomelon, and the other screen plays something that happens in everyday life, like somebody getting their hair cut, somebody getting coffee, lawn being mowed, and these two screens are in front of the child. The moment the child looks away from the Cocomelon screen at the other screen where the real life activity is being carried out, that scene is noted. And all scenes go back to the editor. The editor replaces that with faster cuts. They add animation, they add sound effects, then they add these sweeping panning motions of the camera, and they do engineer things in such a way that the child can't look away. And that didn't sit very right with me. So I started posting about this, and I said, okay, you know what, maybe this is something that people really have to know, that about how not good screens are for kids who are like really, really young. Because I go out in public and I see kids at restaurants, they're with the screen, and at the airport they're with the screen and all, which is fine if it's a once in a, like you're just doing it for travel or for that one occasion. But if it's an everyday thing where the child is just resorting to screens by default, I said, okay, this is a problem and maybe people are not aware of this. And I started posting, and it just so happened that it clicked. Somehow it just took off, and yeah, the page is where it is at today.
So is your thesis now shifted as well? Like you've completed your
Yeah, I completed
PhD.
my PhD. When my daughter was born, I already had my degree in hand.
Okay, so now your focus is on just raising awareness and also making sure you're also integrating the same thing in your life when you're bringing up your child, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It
Sorry.
was very
Yeah.
clear to no, it was very clear to me that I didn't want to raise her with screens, and it was very clear to me that what, I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to uh, use screens as a babysitter. But it wasn't really clear to me what I was going to do as an alternative. So what ended up happening was, so I was working for a firm in the US, and I would work nights generally. So I'd spend the day entertaining her and the nights working, and then I'd end up sleep deprived and cranky. And it's just not sustainable, right? And then the page started taking off, and people started asking me about what is it that we can do to keep the child occupied. Okay, we realize, that screens aren't great, but what are we going to do here on out? And I had no answer at that point in time because I was entertaining my child, and I couldn't tell them quit your jobs and entertain your child. Wouldn't have. so
Okay.
so so I had to come up with something. And what happened was I was um introduced to this Montessori principle of the play is the work of the child. I said, okay, yeah, you know what, it's time that she learns to play with things by herself. And she was maybe 18 months at that time, and she was used to being entertained all the time, and
Mm,
mama's entertaining her, mama's cooking, she's still always in and around all the time. So it got to a point where it was just not sustainable for me, and I had to find a way to make it work for me. And
mm,
then that started. So I got her playing independently, and I said, okay, wow, this is how it worked for me, and it took some time. And
mm,
I'm going to tell people how this is working, and it became a whole thing. It just took off. It got a life of its own.
mm. There's so many parts that I want to explore in detail with you, but one of the things I want to definitely step back and explore is um, habits of us adults and screens, right? Like, we are in an age where we cannot get off the phones ourselves. We are probably doom scrolling. We are scrolling on the way to work, on the way back, at work. Like, our kids around us are constantly seeing these devices attached to us. One parent I spoke to, in fact, said that it's like this co parent that's living with us because it's a member of the family officially, right? It's no longer just you and your wife or whoever else lives in the family. So, for such kind of generation of parents, even before you get to the generation of kids, what are some shifts in parenting that you're noticing, or the shifts that we need to bring about for a tech centric future that we are headed into?
I'd say we really have to go back to the basics. So I like to call it like the three C's: connection, communication, and critical thinking. So these are the three C's that I personally think uh, every parent should be focusing on, especially because tech has become such an integral part of daily life.
Mm,
Uh, what matters the most is that the child is able to connect with you. The child is able, like, you have um, open lines of communication with the child. I would say the litmus test for you being a good parent would be, let's say, like, your child is 13 years old, 14 years old, and the child is exposed to some kind of content, inappropriate content that they're not supposed to be watching.
mm,
So at that point in time, what is the child's reaction likely to be? Is the child's reaction likely to be something like, my mom's going to kill me if she finds out that I watch something like this, and I have to, hide this from her, and I can't bring this up at all in conversation with her? Or is it going to be to make sense of things, like, and say something like, you know what, I saw something which made me really, really uncomfortable, and I don't know what to do about it, and they come to you for help. So is
mm,
the child going to run away from you when
mm,
something that's making them uncomfortable, or something that's unfamiliar, or are they going to come to you? So
mm,
that comes only if there is strong connection beforehand, and there are open lines of communication. When you're not shying away from talking about anything, and you're having all the uncomfortable conversations, that's when that happens. And constant monitoring is not really something that's going to protect them, and having all these rules and boundaries, and saying no screens after 6, that's fine. You do need boundaries, but that's not what's going to protect them. What's going to protect them in the long run and make it sustainable for everybody is having that connection, where it's not coercive, it's not based on control, and
mm,
open lines of communication.
mm,
And another big one, especially now, with AI, I think another big one is there needs to be a little bit of a focus on critical thinking,
mm,
because it's so easy to outsource all of our thinking to AI, right? What do I order today? You now there are reels where they say, take photographs of whatever menu there is at a restaurant, and the AI chat GPT will tell you what to order. So that's the level of outsourcing that's being done. No, the chat GPT is going to go look at all the reviews and say, okay, these are the best dishes. This is what you have to order. This is what you've got to eat. So if that's the level of outsourcing that we're going to be doing, then I think it's really important that we instill some element of critical thinking in the child, because that's really going to be a competitive advantage sometime down the future, when
mm,
everybody is going to be like parroting chat GPT answers, and If
Yeah,
with
that's
homogeneous. So I think that's something that we really need to be focusing on.
So, like the three C's were really valuable. We need to, and I believe those would be the foundational skills that you're also teaching your children to model, especially in this era when we are going to be so dependent on technology, or rather, they are going to learn to become dependent on technology. So, thinking for themselves critically, learning to communicate clearly, and having that connection, that trust relationship, is what we should emphasize on. The other thing that I hear so many parents, even my friends generally talk about is there is so much information on social media right now, especially to do with the right kinds of parenting. Oh, this is right, this is not right. This is how you should raise the right kind of children. This is not. How do you, or rather, how do you? What kind of advice would you give to parents who are, especially new parents, sifting through all of that content and feeling overwhelmed and overloaded, digitally speaking, and feeling that they're not enough, that they're not even able to kick in, like trust their own intuition when it comes to parenting, right?
The irony of coming across this post on social media, I'm sure there's some parent that's going to come across all of this on social media and be thinking about the irony of this whole entire thing. But I would say it would be to come back to your child and not to the algorithm, because no chatbot, no algorithm, no reel, no blog post, nobody knows your child the way you do. It's okay to take in all the information, but just treat it like you would a buffet, right? You go, you pick what fits and you leave what doesn't, right? It's not a prescription. You don't have to follow it to a T. You
Hmm.
just take stock of whatever is out there. If the glove fits, it fits. If it doesn't, that's fine. You don't have to
Hmm.
really, take it as a prescription. The overarching questions that I would be asking myself is, does this really align with my values? Is this going to make life a little bit more complicated for me, or is this going to make my life a little bit easier down the line? Not immediately, but down the line.
Hmm.
And does this work for my child's temperament? Is it going to be an uphill battle that I don't really want to take on when I do not have the bandwidth to do so? So if at all what I'm looking at meets all of that, and then I think it's okay to go ahead with whatever it is that you're watching on.
Hmm. So basically, coming back to reality is what you would recommend. We
Going
often.
through the child, yes.
Yes. Okay. And is there such a thing as a balanced relationship with technology, with screens? Do you believe in that? Can that exist?
I think with enough checks and balances, yes, sure, I think that can happen. But then there has to be this fundamental foundation that I actually feel like the early years, especially because right now my daughter is really young, that essentially, there's not much to be gained from technology at this age. When the child is like 4 or 5, okay, there's not much to be gained from technology at this age. So I would say you start off no tech for
Mm.
at least 4 or 5, and then you go low tech. I wouldn't really say go live under a rock and you don't need tech, and it is the way of the future, yes. But then once the child starts using screens, then there needs to be checks and balances, because it's going to be so easy, right, for the child to just go on and on binging, and one reel after the other. Even us, you just take the phone and I think, okay, I'm going to text Deepa right now, and I just go get diverted into I just start watching a reel, and then it's 20 minutes, I'm still watching a reel, I've forgotten that I've got to text Deepa in the first place.
Mm.
There have to be checks and balances, and I think a lot of that is through what the parent models. The
Mm.
child looks at the parent scrolling and the child saying mama mama, and you're not really listening to the child,
Mm.
then it
That is.
kind of sets things up for them to go down the same path as well. I recently did like a workshop for parents and students at a school, and then a bunch of the kids came to me and they said, you know what, you told our parents how to control our tech use. Now, who's going to talk to our parents about their tech? Because they're on their phones all the time. So, tell us what to do about that. So, it's very much what we model, because at the end of the day, kids do as we do and they don't do as we say. You just can't be a hypocrite and say no screens for you and then you be on your screens all day. That doesn't really work.
That's true. We have to model all sorts of behavior, and they even my 18-month-old, she's just learning how to talk, things here and there, and it's very fascinating to me how she picks up words and she like repeats them 5 days down the road, and I'm always in awe of how her like young children's brains are grasping things, and you know even when you think they're not looking at you, they're constantly looking at you. That's and they're constantly observing everything you do, your actions, your behavior, and it's of course they're going to look at you when you're looking at screens. So yeah. I want to get a little personal here, Dr. Madhumita, and I want you to share with us how your parenting journey has been so far. Like, have you relied on internet to tell you how to be a good parent? How has your relationship with technology changed since you had a child in your life?
So my tryst with uh, parenting and tech, this came way before I became a parent. It was actually, I think it was even before I got married. I am on Instagram. Instagram is my primary platform, but
Hmm.
the platform that I got all my information from was Facebook.
Hmm.
And I saw this group called Gentle Parenting India,
Hmm.
which is a fantastic resource, by the way. If somebody here is struggling with, maintaining it, like having an even temper around their children, they really have to go check out that group. That's a fantastic resource.
Hmm.
So I came across that group, and it was such a mind blowing concept to me that a child could be raised without all the physical discipline that I had seen with myself and my friends growing up. It was just the norm, right? You do
Hmm.
something, you get disciplined, and discipline means you either get yelled at or you get two whacks. That's
Yeah.
that's the default. Like Asian way of disciplining is you take the slipper and just give the child two. Okay, so it was such a mind blowing concept to me that a child could be raised without you yelling, screaming, and discipline could be there's something called like there's gentle discipline. How do you discipline gently? That was such a mind blowing concept to me, and I joined that group even way before I was even married. And there were parents that. Would post regularly in those groups and say, what, my child bit me, and I'm struggling really hard with not yelling at the child, and that and this. And there'll be people who said, okay, this is what people who've been through the trenches, right? Who've gone through the same things. They would say, okay, this is what happened, and this is what worked for us. This is what didn't work for us. And then the same parent would come back a month later, 2 months later, and said, yes, I tried all of this and this worked. This didn't.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that was really nice. And I was in those groups following for many years, and I could see like the evolution of those parents, like how they started. They'd come with problems, and a couple of years down the line, a new parent would come and they'd be the one that would be giving them solutions. So
Hmm.
really fascinating for me to watch. And I think it introduced me to a lot of concepts that I wouldn't have tried otherwise. Not
Hmm.
that often work for me. So there's this baby-led weaning, which I was very interested in, did not work for me. My child made a mess and she choked. She choked on a couple pieces of fruit, and I freaked out. I said, I'm not going to do this again. I'm going to do the traditional way.
Hmm.
So, but it just opened my mind up to the possibilities out there and so many new things that you could try, right?
Hmm.
I didn't know that there was this, the crying out method. I didn't know there was something where you let the child just cry. I never tried that because it just didn't sit right with me. Again, going back to that question of yours on, there's so much of information. What do you do? It just
Yeah.
didn't sit right. I just couldn't do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't feel right to you, you just don't do it. So there was a lot of information, and I'm really grateful to all of those groups for having, been such fantastic resources at a time when I really needed it. I'd say this was before my daughter was 2 years old,
Hmm.
and after that, I transitioned to being a content creator around the time my daughter was maybe 16 months old, 17 months old, and after that, I've really stopped relying much on those groups uh, as much as I used to.
Hmm.
Yeah, but they were really important at that point in time that I was going through it.
So more like almost personal stories in a small community shared with one another can help knowledge building, can help foster that trust with other parents when they know that, oh, there are a few other parents with similar backgrounds such as mine who's tried this and this has worked for them, so I can give it a try, versus probably consuming en masse content, which may or may not apply to your context. Because even though, like, let's say we're living in some remote part of India and consuming content from somewhere in the US, that same thing can't apply to your day to day, right? So like, did it, like, generally from your experience, help you keep your anxieties at bay, especially as a new parent? Or did it sometimes fuel anger or fuel irritation and anxiety when you were going through social media?
I think you brought up a fantastic point where you just said, right, that the solutions that you get in those groups are personalized to you
Hmm.
as opposed to something that's more generic on social media. I Because I steered clear from that generic thing, I
Hmm.
it was much more personalized to me. So, uh, just to give you an example, my daughter, when she was 2 months old, she just wouldn't sleep at all.
Hmm.
She just wouldn't sleep at all during the night.
Hmm.
She'd stay up all night crying, and nothing could console her. Like I just had to take her and walk the entire night, and that's the only thing that would calm her down. And skin to skin contact and walking.
Hmm.
And I'm just walking all day, all night, all night, all night. And in the day, obviously, she needs to have her all the feeds that go on, right? So I'm
Yeah.
not sleeping during the day. I'm not sleeping during the night, and I was so cranky. And I was at that was probably the lowest I've been in my entire parenting journey. The lack of sleep really does something to you. So 10 days, 15 days of this, I said I can't do this anymore. And I said, okay, I can't do this anymore. All the remedies, home remedies that my mom was suggesting, nothing worked. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to the internet and I'm going to ask them what to do. So I went and posted in one of those groups, Gentle Baby Sleep India,
Hmm.
and nobody could do anything about it. Her
Hmm.
circadian rhythm was kind of getting set, and she was figuring out what was day, what was night. It took its time, but
Hmm.
then there were I think I posted, and within a couple of hours, there were 50, 60 comments saying, "We've been through this. It gets better.
Huh.
This is not the end of the world. We've been through this. It's going to be okay." And at that point, when you feel like this is never going to end, you feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and every day is feeling like a lifetime. Those comments like really, really helped me power through for the next 20 days. So whenever I felt low, I'd go back to those comments and I'd be like, okay, uh, and it did a lot. It did a lot for me. Had it been like more generic content where some influencer is coming and showing me, you know what, my child has been sleeping from day one, maybe, it would have created a lot more anxiety. Yeah, I can really see where you're coming from. I can totally see your point.
Nodding my head because I saw all of that, and I agree. I Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you, but my postpartum, I think, is very underrated, especially the first 4 months. There isn't enough information out there, especially included in your prenatal classes or whatever classes, or even your grandparents or aunts and uncles who force you to have a baby. None of them tell you about how nightmarish and terrible postpartum is, especially when, like, you have a lot of other body issues while you're recovering, and your child has some issues. Maybe they're not latching on, maybe you're not producing enough milk, maybe you're having an oversupply, and all of these social media content feel like they're targeted towards you to tell you you're not doing enough. And on top of that, of course, you're sleep deprived. And something similar, but because I gave birth in Canada, it felt more isolating also because it was winter time, and the kind of content and people I was surrounded with was all catering towards this is the only way to make sure your baby sleeps safely. So the focus was on isolation rather than contact naps or contact sleeping. And I was heavily dissuaded from doing such things. So, which is why it's so interesting, because every parent or mother I speak to, they all talk about how there are lack of resources, especially information, the right kind of information about postpartum. It makes it seem like it's biological, it's evolutionary, it has to happen, so you will go through it, rather than empathizing or talking from the perspective of, okay, here's the light at the end of the tunnel, as you properly
Yeah.
put it, right? So, sorry, yes, go on.
Uh, so personally, I'd say for me, it was really, really helpful. Also, because maybe that point you brought up about it not being generic content and it not
Yeah.
being targeted, and all the reels that do well, right? So the algorithm is also geared in such a way that it shows you content which maybe is not the norm. Maybe the child sleeping through the night is not really the norm, but then you the reels that go viral are kids who are sleeping through the night from day one. And then it makes you, and kids who eat everything on their plates. Oh my God, those reels do so well, plate in front of the child. Child's polishing, asking for seconds. And here you have a child who's spitting at you and who's scratching you and trying to bite you and all of that. So yeah, it does sometimes make it it kind of portrays an unrealistic picture sometimes. Yeah, yeah, I do get it. And I do see how that can be a source of frustration.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, like, let's pivot a little bit into, even how technology has perhaps changed for you, um, after becoming a parent. Now your child is a little bit older, so you perhaps have different rules when it comes to tech use. So, like, what are some of the rules that you practice at home and expectations or boundaries you've set, probably with your family or extended family when it comes to technology?
As far as she goes, the grandparents on both sides are very aware that she doesn't have any screen time.
Hmm.
Though her cousins get screen time, her grandparents still actively try to not, like, take her away from their place. They take her to the park, or when I'm not around, they'll try to do something and step in and try to really ensure that she doesn't get that screen time, which I'm really grateful for, because that is, in my experience, as I do consults, I see that that's not something that's really common. The
Mm.
guidelines are more like, what harm can it do? You grew up watching TV. It's not really, the worst. If the child watches a couple hours of reels, that's fine, and they just hand over the phone to the child.
Mm.
So I think that way I'm more the exception than the norm.
Mm.
That I've got like really really supportive grandparents on both sides. As for the general rules of the house, we've got tech-free zones, so places where there's absolutely no tech allowed. The dining table, no tech allowed there, and the bedroom, no
Mm.
tech allowed in the bedroom. The other thing we do is tech-free times, where you're not allowed to use tech when you eat. We all eat as a family. You're supposed to like sit together, have conversations. I want that to be the norm from the beginning, where
Mm.
not looking at their phone and
Yeah.
in silence. And so post 7 in the evening is when my husband's back, and then it's all three of us as a family, and phones don't come out there. There's a designated spot where we all drop our phones. Yeah. And my daughter's encouraged to call us out, so it does happen, right, that the times that you remember, what, tomorrow I've got to do this, I've got to order the groceries right now, it has to be done right now, I need my phone. So I narrate what I'm going to do. I will tell my daughter, what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my phone for 5 minutes. I'm going to set an alarm. I'm going to do this. This is the activity I'm setting out to do, because again, you get into that doom scrolling thing, right? You go to call somebody, and then you go and start watching reels. So I tell her, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come back in 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and once that's done, you put the phone back and come. If sees us slipping up, she's allowed to call us out.
Mm.
And she does a very good job at that. She said, "No, why are you on your phone? Why are you on your phone? You just said you're not going to be on your phone." So, and because it gives us some semblance of control, right?
Yeah.
Uh, if it's just going to be me that's laying down all the rules, telling my child constantly what to do, what not to do, it creates a balance of power, and it kind of tells her that I tell you what to do and you listen, and there's naturally going to be some amount of rebellion at some point.
That's
So
true.
has some power, and trying to tell her, like, you know what, you can call us out too, because when we need our tech, this thing, you can call us out too. So
Mm.
that I think she loves doing that, and I think that's worked out really 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 well for us. uh,
So
yeah,
you're
you go on.
sorry. No,
No,
you're
go on.
giving her accountability and ownership. Like you're teaching her
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
skills very early on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something she loves to do also. She loves to be the boss of things. So yeah, that's worked out pretty well for us. Another thing that we do personally, just me and my husband, is we do not wake up to alarms on our phones. So
Mm.
that's so right. You just have an alarm on your phone, you take your phone, you turn off the alarm, go straight to social media, and you start swiping. So we have the phone in a different room because it's not allowed in the bedroom. You have physical alarms that you have to get up and turn off, and
Mm.
then you get on with the day. You have a cup of coffee. The first 20 minutes of the day is no tech, and then
Mm.
you get on. You answer your mails, you answer your messages, whatever it is.
I think these are such simple but efficient rules that can be implemented if you have the like what do you say if you just do it, that's all, right? Like you just need that willingness probably from within. I think we try to follow some 2-3% of the rules that you're saying as well, like no phones on the dining table, no phones in common area. Sometimes phone comes into the bedroom, but we're trying to get rid of that as well. So this is really really useful for a lot of parents hearing the podcast. I do want to dive in a bit more to ask you about what you think about sharenting, especially parents who are oblivious or are totally unaware of how children's photos and stuff can be used online, like beyond the online space. Even we're talking like private accounts. If you're just sharing with like a small circle on Instagram or on Facebook, what are your thoughts or perspectives on that, and any advice or strategies on that?
So this is a pet peeve of mine. I post about, not posting your kids' faces on social
Yeah.
media. Sometimes I post on, not posting your kids' faces on social media, because that's something I don't do either. Any content that has featuring my daughter is always from the back without any identifying information, and that is something that triggers a lot of people, because they feel like, what's the extent to which you want to police a child? Are you going to come out tomorrow and say there are predators on the street, so don't take your child out on the street for a walk? Is that what you're going to do? So that's the argument that I'm met with. But I don't think people are really aware of the extent to which things can go to. because literally just yesterday I posted about a man who was jailed for uh, taking innocent pictures of kids
Hmm.
and then turning them into explicit content using AI. With AI, you can do anything. The dark web is filled with images of explicit material made with children's faces from normal regular photos. And these photos, you just take the child's face, superimpose it on something else, and make it look a certain way. And
Hmm.
there are hundreds and thousands of photos, or like of kids, of real actual kids on the dark web. If there is a chance that there's somebody that's going to do this,
Hmm.
and obviously, something as basic as taking your child out for a walk, taking your child out to the park, that's something that's really essential for their development. Is it essential for their development to post them online? what
No.
kind what is the child going to get out of this? If you Some parents come to me and say, My child feels good when they see the likes." That's an issue. That's a whole different issue. If your child sees feels good, because their sense of self-worth at a time when it is developing shouldn't come from a bunch of strangers telling them how to feel.
Hmm.
Okay, all that external validation shouldn't be what makes them who they are.
Hmm.
Tomorrow, somebody, today you get 1,000 likes on a photo of yours, and tomorrow, let's say you do not. Does that mean that you're nothing in that span of a day?
Yeah.
It's it's not the best idea to really expose children to external validation as well. And
Hmm.
I till the child is at an age where they can consent to having their pictures up, I think parents should really steer clear of that, remove all identifying information. I see parents, no, on the first day of school, the child's got a badge and the school uniform, and they've got their full name written here.
Everything.
Yeah, and in front of the school gate, the parent has put a picture. Oh, happy first day of school, and all the identifying information is there. There's some, and the parent is celebrating the child's birthday. Happy fourth birthday. So they know the child's date of birth. They know the child's full name. They know the child's pet name. They know everything about the child. So there are hundreds of strangers who know everything about the child, and the child doesn't know who they are. And that's kind of concerning, right? That anybody can come up to you in public and you say they can tell you that they know you, and you have no clue who they are. For a child, even if you leave out all of the worst case scenario that can happen with AI, even if you leave out all of that, just the fact that the world knows who the child is, and the child has no clue that these people even exist, I think that's a little concerning to from a security point of
It maybe this is a stretch here, but this is like the connection I've or the dots I've been trying to make with a lot of other guests who've come on the show, with AI and the future of jobs at stake as well, and with the growing amount of digital creators economy. um more younger and younger adults, or kids are taking on to like influencing becoming their career, right? Like, I have a nephew who is probably
view.
just 8.5 years old and is
Okay.
very excited about starting a YouTube page just to post music and mishmashes he's making on his like father's phone. And it's adorable to hear them talk about that, but is it something that we are making way for far more easily, where children are getting into influencing sort of careers, and it's kind of a race to win people's attention, and put yourself out there and hustle while you're so young to prove your self-worth.
I think that's definitely the case, because there are no barriers to entry, right? You've got to so for you to get a conventional job, you've got to wait till you do your class 12, then another 3 or 4 year degree, and then you get a conventional job. Here you just start off when you're 10 years old, 12 years old. All you need is just a phone, and
Yeah.
kids have their own devices at what, 6, 7, 8. And the problem with that is everything starts to become a performance. It starts to become a curation, and it's not
Mm.
really you being in the moment, living things the way you're supposed to as a child. I recently was at a public park outside. It was in Europe, so I was in Europe for a bit, and I was at a public park where there were a bunch of girls who were filming for TikTok. And so
Yeah, I have to take a moment to laugh because the amount of people I see with ring lights in public places. But yes, go on.
and there's one girl that's trying to swing, and the other girls are telling her, you know what, you sit with your legs crossed, you hike your skirt up a little more. And it kind of gets you thinking, because that's what gets you views, right? You start to think about content differently when you're creating content, because you create the kind of content that gets you the most amount of engagement, that gets you the most likes, that gets you the most comments. So these girls are telling the other one, you know what, sit in a certain way, sit with one leg stretched out, the other leg the other way, and hike up your skirt and sit this way, sit that way. And these are girls who are like, they couldn't have been more than 14, 15. And you've come to a public park, and 14, 15 I was running around all over playing hide and seek with my friends at that age. And these kids are all like, no, posing and angles and, bring your jaw down, don't take the shot from here. Or they just know how things are to be done, and it's posed and curated in a specific way so as to get certain amount of attention. And I think that's really sad that children are forced to grow up quicker than uh, they we did at least.
I mean, on one side, you think that yes, there's a lot of the hyper connectedness of this world is, you know, making sure you access talent. You see, beautiful things come out on the internet, because internet does give you the show you a side that's raw, that's unfiltered, that's beautiful, that's slow sometimes to look at as well. And on the other side, you have a lot of other things too, right? So, but I know we're going through the more denser part of conversation, so I want to pivot and talk a bit more about the hopeful part of the future, where we're raising generation alpha beta, to be resilient, to be strong, in this technological era, so building in good habits. So what excites you the most about raising your child?
I think we live in like unprecedented times where our kids aren't just like passive consumers of the world. They also have the ability to change it, to shape it, because of the tools that they have available, which we didn't have when we were growing up. They have access to so much
Mm.
ideas, tools that were once out of reach. And if we can just teach them to stay grounded and rooted in who they are, they can do something. I feel like they can do something truly amazing with that reach, with all the tools that they have available to them.
Mm.
And uh, they can build, they can challenge, and that kind of freedom, if, when you pair it with the right values, I think there can be something absolutely amazing that comes out of
That, yeah, that is true, because there is so much of abundance when it comes to the tools that are available at their disposal, that I, I mean, even sky is not a limit anymore. So that is true. If you were to think about the kind of skills they would need, or how education or the future of work would look like, what do you think?
I think it would go back to those three points that we spoke about right at the beginning of the conversation, right? Critical thinking, I think, is going to be the most important skill that sets kids apart, right? I think that's going to be like a competitive edge. And I think uh, the with AI, it's so easy to like, especially if there's something like an essay, right? It's so easy for you to just give a prompt and
Mm.
then you get like a whole essay in a second or two. I
Yeah.
think we focus more on the process and not the end result.
Mm.
How did you arrive at the things that you did? And if you focus more on the how and not the end product, I think that we should be able to foster some critical thinking skills in the child. And that I think that's going to be a skill that's going to set kids apart.
Mm, that's true. So, focusing a lot on critical thinking abilities and to be able to think for your own self in the reality would be important, even no matter what the scene of jobs looks like, no matter how qualifications might look like. There was one area I know we didn't delve into much deeper, and I'm not sure where India is currently at that stage. And I'm going into the space of education and technology. Is technology starting to become a very active part of schools and curriculum already, in at least where you are?
Don't really think so. I don't think it's entered schools too much as such.
Mm.
Uh, at least at least where I am, right? Uh, which is preschool. Preschool, it's not really made its way. The maximum that happens is they play these rhymes on speakers and they don't let the child really watch the visuals. But all of the Cocomelon rhymes my daughter knows by heart because it plays on speakers in her
No.
school.
Okay.
So so that's the extent of tech use in her school. But AI is not something that's really come i-
Yet.
yeah, come yet. But I think as the child goes into higher classes, I think it's very likely that it's going to make an entry there, because that's the direction we are heading in as a society, right? So
Yeah, because in especially in Canada schools, like public schools,
Right.
They hand out even private schools as well. I think hand out Chromebooks and personal devices um, in, before middle school itself, from primary school. So kids have access to school devices, and I think the switch happened since post pandemic. So I was a little bit curious to see if technology has entered the education spaces in India. The same's with US, and kids get to take these tech devices home. And a lot of kids are also bringing smartphones into school. There's no regulation or rule around not to bring smartphones
Correct.
into school, and there are no you need to lock it up in the locker kind of rule. So there's been a whole kind of an uprising and debate in the US, in the North America's context, as well as I believe in Europe, for like screen-free school movements and things like that. So kids are not taking these devices around. So I was generally wondering if you had if you've been hearing such things happening in India or in Asia around that.
So, because I've been doing talks in schools, I think I can give you a little bit of perspective on that. The schools that I've been visiting, the maximum tech enforcement that they have is that if the school charges a higher amount, because you were talking about public school, the school that I've been visiting are private schools. So if the school may charge a higher amount if they want to give a device to the child, which is likely an iPad or a tablet, and they do have a strict no device policy when classes are in session. So
Mm.
there's a locker, there is some place where
You put
you
the
you could put it away, and you can't really have your phones with you in person. We've still not gotten to that stage where you just have free reign of whatever. But once the child goes back home, there are online portals where the child is expected to come visit and have a look at what the homework for the day is supposed to be, and they're supposed to fill in all their assignments, and they're
Hmm.
supposed to put it on that portal. So that is the extent of tech use. Also, there are also these learning apps on which the child is expected to learn certain things and do their assignments. So that is the extent of tech use at the moment. AI is not really played an active role, but I'm very sure that there are kids who are going behind the scenes and who are asking AI to do their homework for them. I'm very sure that's happening.
Yeah, it's free to use, right? So it's interesting. It'll be also interesting to see in the next 5-10 years how that changes in India itself. If there's far more adoption of technology in schools versus far lesser. I know there was one, and we are going towards the conclusion of this call. I know there's one aspect we did discuss a bit briefly pre-call, and I want to touch on that again. Just the differences in the information coming out of West versus theses or language being used in India, right? I don't know what context we were talking about, but I want to unpack that a little bit if if that's something you want to do.
Sure. So I just spoke about this gentle parenting thing, right? Because that's a
Yes.
relatively new concept in India, and that's not something people are doing. And we confuse gentle parenting with permissive parenting, where we say so. A lot of us 80s 90s we grew up getting physically disciplined and reprimanded quite a lot, and we've decided, okay, this is not something I want to subject my child to. So we think the alternative is whatever the child says, we say yes, and there are no boundaries. So the
Mm.
child says, I want more screen time, you give the child more screen time. The child says, I want to eat junk between meals, you give the child junk between meals, and there's no moderation as such. That's the other end of the spectrum. And gentle parenting, if you look at in the West, always the parent is very cool, calm, collected. The way they address the child, that's not something that really comes naturally in the Indian diaspora. At least it's really
Mm.
different the way we do things. And I think it also depends the kind of culture that there is in the West, right? They are a more individualistic culture as opposed to India, where we are a more collectivistic culture. So empowering the child to think independently while also listening and following the norms in a collectivist culture is a challenge by itself, because you want the child to be an independent thinker,
Mm.
and then you also want the child to follow certain norms in the house, the elders, where the child is expected to behave a certain way, but you also want the child to be to have the space to say yes and no. I will not touch this person, I will not touch that person. So what happens is it puts the parent in a very hard spot,
Mm.
uh, where you are it's between a it kind of starts to feel like uh, the older generation is blaming you for being too gentle on the child, And
Mm,
you also start to question yourself, and you start to feel like, what, am I doing something wrong? Am I, following all of these Western influencers, and in a context which doesn't just fit in, right? So I think we really need more of more content on gentle parenting and gentle discipline in particular in the Indian context. How
mm,
do you, when you have elders around who do not really understand what it is that you're trying to do? Because in my case, it works because it's just, most of the time it's just me, my husband, and my daughter. It's us in isolation. But then when we go back to the elders, they can't really fathom what's going on.
mm.
So it becomes a little difficult that way.
And perhaps you've also seen the other side of the spectrum or experience that maybe not in your context, but like we are also traveling back to India, meeting a lot of relatives and elders, and very easily it can swing the other side. They will not like, for example, go give your child a chocolate. They're 18 months old. They've never been introduced to sugar. And that's the first thing they do. Oh, give that child a chocolate or give this snack or cookie or something like that because you're visiting for the first time. It's okay. Like, let me give a bit of my love. So it quickly goes on the other side too, right? And the thing about like all the things that you learn, like for example, baby led weaning was one thing you touched upon. I did some course on baby led weaning and they told me, oh, no sugar, no salt, first entire year. And when I told that to my parents, my mom was like, what are you talking about? You can't not give salt at all. Our cuisine is such that you need to add salt to, fermented batter, idlis and dosas. You have to start introducing little by little. And that's when it made sense to me that, okay, some parts of what they're saying need to be incorporated because that's the culture I come from versus blanket picking that up. And it's very interesting you spoke about gentle parenting because the other thing that we were not aware about, at least when I grew up, was this thing called emotional regulation or like dysregulation and regulation. And it's not just something that happens in children or toddlers when they're going through, their tantrums or regressions, but it's something that we go through as adults too.
Tell me
Um,
about it.
and there is not enough information or not enough being spoken, especially in the Indian context, when you live intergenerationally in the same household about how do you regulate when there are so many different generations or people with different emotions and perspectives on how to parent. Like, have you experienced something like that?
Can't really speak to intergenerational living because it's not something that I've done extensively. It's something that I've done in phases, but not extensively. And like I told you, I've been really lucky to have people around me who've let me lead, who've let me. So when my daughter was very young, they said, you give the child nutmeg very young, as in few months old. You 3 or 4 months old, and the child has not been exposed to any kind of solids. You boil nutmeg in milk and give the child a couple of spoons, and the child is just supposed to sleep because it acts like a sedative. I put my foot down and I said, no, this is not going to happen. And I was very lucky to have people who didn't question what I said, and they said, okay, whatever you're comfortable with, we're not going to force you. I know people whose families have gone behind their back and done whatever it is that they wanted to do. So that is an issue.
Yeah.
What was the question again? Can you come back? I just got sidetracked.
No, no, that's okay. I'm talking about like emotional regulation, right? As part of the gentle parenting concept too, or an extension to it rather. Like parents themselves not being aware that emotions are at play and they need to regulate themselves first before addressing the child that's emotionally amped up, or even their own parents or elders in the house, right? So those sort of dynamics and not being aware of that concept in itself in the Indian culture.
Yeah, I think that's such a fantastic question because the first reaction when a child generally cries is also, don't cry, don't cry, this is going to be okay. And whatever the child is crying for, you try to make that thing okay very quickly so the child just stops crying. uh, the aim is to pacify the child but not really help the child get through their emotions. And I was actually, I was just having a conversation with a friend, and I got like mad at my friend, and I said, okay, no, I don't want to talk anymore. And immediate reaction is, no, 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 don't be mad, don't be mad. They you As a human being, you're allowed to experience the entire gamut of emotions out there, everything from anger, sadness, disgust, hopelessness, everything. And you get through it, and then you come back to the mean, right? And then you get back to normal. Somehow in our culture, the only acceptable emotion to have, especially for a child, is happiness. You be happy all the time, and you're not supposed to cry. And it's a very difficult concept. Even even I've had some amount of difficulty, trying to convince the people to if my daughter's upset, just let her be, let her just get through that. And you kind of get branded as somebody who's like, oh, you're very comfortable with your daughter crying all the time, you want your daughter to cry all the time. So that's what they say. But it's really hard to get them to understand that uh, the only way out is through the emotion. You let her process it completely and then you get through it. And when they're not letting the child do that, there's no way they let the adult do that. What is there for you to be angry about? There's nothing to be angry about. So you're just not allowed to feel certain emotions in the Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
You're just expected to be like very happy and cheerful all the time. And that is a little bit of a problem. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and in such a kind of context, it is very difficult for those Western sort of teachings or thesis or whatnot to fit, right? And through social media, it only seems rosy, right? It seems like, oh, this has worked for this family, which means that's the exact same thing we should be applying here too. So yeah, sorry, closing the full loop on that. I know we've gone way over time with our time here, Dr. Madhumita. This has been a very enriching conversation. One thing I love doing with my guests before we end is ask them one tech rule, one parenting rule they abide by. You've given us several tech rules, but I definitely want to pick your brain on the parenting rule. Something short, something memorable for parents to take away.
So this is something that I try to live by. If I want her to come to me as a teen, I have to listen without judgment when she's 3. I have to be able to connect when she's a toddler. I have to build those pathways where she feels that I am always available, always listening, always in the background, always cheering for her. If at all I want her to come back to me with whatever issues that she's facing when she's a teenager. So it was what I touched on earlier, right? That is the one marker I have for whether or not I've been a good parent. Her accomplishments, her laurels are hers. It doesn't mean that I was a good parent. This one thing determines, at least according to me, this one thing about her coming back to me whenever she has a tough time. This I feel is what is a marker of me being a good parent. So yeah, this is something that I try to live by.
That is a really, really, absolutely amazing one. I think that's one for my books as well. Something I need to learn to live by. Uh, this is an amazing, amazing conversation. This was very heartfelt, very wholesome, but also very realistic and much, much needed for a lot of parents, a lot of education, people in the education sector, people who are generally raising children in all environments to listen to. I'm going to drop in your bio in the description below so people can check out your page and follow you and learn more through your stories too. Thank you so much, Dr. Madhumita.
Thank you so much for having me, Deepa. Thank you. It's been lovely being there.